This is Block 9, the Liberal Establishment, Section 5, the Cold War outside of Vietnam, with the section beginning Nixon Ushers in Detente. One other thing I wanted to say about Nixon and China, that the saying, only Nixon could go to China, it became a saying in American political lexicon, and it meant that only someone who had fought their entire life against communism would have the political ability to pull off what Nixon pulled off and not get overly criticized for it. That if a Democrat had done what Nixon had done, the Republican Party would have yelled and screamed that they were soft on communism, and that argument would have gained traction with the American people. But the fact that it was Nixon who had fought his entire life a battle against communism, it kind of allowed Nixon to do it. So to say that, only Nixon can go to China means that, to make peace with that, extending the olive branch of peace is a lot more believable if you've worked against a person for, a long time. It means that that's not a really great definition. That only Nixon can go to China means that you kind of have to have moral authority to engage in something that you might have disagreed with in the past. That's not a good really definition either. If I'll give you an example, and maybe this will open it up, that if President Obama put a serious plan to reform Medicare and Social Security to make them more affordable for you guys, for future generations, that would be a Nixon goes to China event. That nobody would expect President Obama to do that. It does not fit in with what President Obama has made his career about. And if a Republican were to make the very same proposals as a theoretical Obama proposal to reform Medicare and Social Security, President Obama's party would yell and scream, much like Republicans would have yelled and screamed if it was a Democrat that had gone to China. So I hope that kind of opens that up. But Nixon's visit in China, regardless, of the saying that came out from it, did bring about a softening in relations between the superpowers. Because as soon as Nixon was done in China, which really freaked out the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union kind of came to the bargaining table. That the Soviets were worried about a rivalry with China if China was going to be backed by the United States. They could not defeat a combination diplomatically of China and the United States. So Nixon followed up his visit to China with a visit to Moscow in May of 1972, and in that visit, the Soviets were ready to deal. And the deals that they made were known as détente. It's a French word. It means the softening of tensions. And in all the deals that were signed, one of the things that was decided that the Soviet Union was chronically short of food. That, Soviet economics, command economics don't work. They're incredibly inefficient. And Soviet grain harvests were always kind of below expectations. So the United States agreed to sell the Soviets $750 million worth of grain every year to make up for Soviet food shortages. Another thing that they signed was an Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the ABM Treaty, which was signed by President Nixon in this period of détente. And the ABM Treaty severely restricted the use of anti-ballistic missiles. Now let's have a look at this really kind of cool-looking space-agey chart, what a ballistic missile is. And this has to do with first strikes and mutually assured destruction, that from the dawn of the missile age, it had been assumed that there was nothing that could be done once the missiles were in the air. Once the missiles were flying, the missiles were going to, explode over their targets. Nuclear war, very bad, everybody dies. But American scientists and Soviet scientists started thinking, okay, well, is there a way to shield a country from ballistic missiles? And an anti-ballistic missile system was envisioned. It was not built. The picture that I'm showing you here is how a anti-ballistic missile system would work if it was ever kind of perfected. And it's the sort of things that, is sometimes worked on, sometimes not. But I'll show you how this works. That a missile is launched from the Soviet Union or China or from wherever, and it's up in the air. Across the ocean, that the anti-ballistic country has early warning radars, and these radars pick up the missiles in flight. bum, 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 bum. As the missile is flying, all these different radars are tracking it and kind of finding its exactly where it is, in the sky. A missile then is launched from the United States. It's an anti-ballistic missile. It's a missile designed to destroy a missile. And this missile goes up, and using all of these different satellite communications, the missile hits the missile in flight and destroys it. You can do it, theoretically, you could even destroy it from a satellite. That a satellite shooting a laser can destroy a missile in flight. In theory, it's never been done before, but, all it's a matter of is engineering and technology. But that's what an ABM is. It's an anti-ballistic missile system. The reason it's so dangerous in the Cold War is if you have an ABM system and your enemy does not, it makes nuclear war winnable. That there cannot be a first strike. That a first strike, all these missiles flying across, would not hit the target. They would be destroyed in the air. They would be intercepted by anti-ballistic missiles. And if you destroy a country's first strike capability and make nuclear war winnable, that if the United States has an ABM shield, and the Soviet Union doesn't, the Soviet Union can say, well, the United States will attack first, our counterattack, our missiles will be shot down, and therefore the United States can win nuclear war. The Soviets know that American technology is better than theirs, so one of the things that is dealt with in this détente, this meeting between Nixon and Brezhnev, is ABM systems are outlawed. That being able to destroy the enemy's first strike allows you, in theory, to win nuclear war. And to use a first launch yourself without having to worry about a counterstrike. It destroys the concept of mutually assured destruction, and it just brings too much instability. And Kissinger was what is known in the foreign policy community as a realist. He valued stability and security, and so Kissinger signs off on this ABM treaty restricting the amount of anti-ballistic missile launchers and anti-ballistic missile research that both countries can do. So that's the next part of this détente. First you have the grain, then you have the ABM treaty, and then you have what's known as SALT I. SALT I stands for the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. And this was the first time ever, the first treaty ever, to limit the growth in the number of nuclear missiles. That from the invention of nuclear missiles in the late 50s up through the early 70s, that both countries had been building more and more and more and more and more missiles. So not all the missiles would be destroyed at a first strike. We've talked about that at length. But in the SALT I treaty, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed to freeze the number of long-range ICBMs that they had where they were then. That you could replace missiles, but the SALT treaty said no more new missiles. It did not reduce the number of weapons, and it did not prevent bigger and better weapons from being developed, but it was indicative of the first time that the scary arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union is slowing down. That both countries say, look, this is really expensive, this is really threatening the peace of the world. We don't trust each other enough to start getting rid of our nuclear weapons, but at least we are starting to restrict them. That we're going to cap what we have right now. We're not building any more. So this was Nixon's détente. The anti-communist warrior, who ends the war in Vietnam, who goes to China, who ushers in détente with the Soviet Union. His foreign policy successes were seen at the time as immense. And they softened tensions and made the world a much safer place in the 1970s.